All right, thanks, Jason. All right, moving on to the goals of the Community Grants Program. So I'll go through some of the goals that we have on the screen here. The goals of the Community Grants Program are to support frontline community initiatives and projects to advance community-based climate resilience, enhance the capacity of frontline communities and organizations and their climate resilience adaptation work, establish connections, relationships, and mutual learning between the Resilience Collaborative and frontline communities, scale up local solutions and lessons learned to decision makers at a state, regional, or national level, or to other resourcing entities, and finally, to scale local solutions to similar communities facing similar challenges. So a few notes about these goals. These goals are important because they provide kind of a roadmap for us in determining the intended impact of the grants program, but they're also helpful to keep in mind because we'll look to these to help us in deciding how proposals align with the program. So we've mentioned frontline communities already quite a bit. So what do we mean when we say frontline communities? So the Resilience Collaborative understands frontline communities as those who are disproportionately impacted by climate change, populations who face historic and current inequalities, often experience the earliest and most acute impacts of climate change, and have limited resources to adapt to those changes. These groups are often communities of color, indigenous, low income, and those whose lives and livelihoods depend on climate-sensitive natural resources. And so what we're getting at with that definition is that this grant program is really intended to support communities and groups that may often face barriers in accessing grants, like Jason mentioned earlier. And so these funds, we want to support projects that advance community-based climate resilience. And so these projects could be very innovative and unique, or they could be projects that may be less innovative, but are still very impactful and important to communities. And so when thinking about your projects, I think we're less interested in a specific type of project and more interested in how projects connect with and speak to community priorities and needs. So if you'd like a little more guidance on what kinds of projects we're looking for, we have a long list of project ideas and topics on our community grants webpage. But again, I think it's important to emphasize that we don't want to be prescriptive of what the projects look like. We want these funds to move forward climate resilience priorities for communities rather than defining exactly what projects should look like. All right, moving on to some application details. I quickly want to mention that all this information, along with the application form, are available on the webpage. And Tess, if you could drop that in the chat, that would be great. I'm sure a lot of you already visited it, but if you have any questions, that's probably the first and best place to start out. So the application process, so please note that the application is a two-step process. Step one is a letter of interest, and the second step is a full application. And so the reason we have that letter of interest step is so that we can get a sense of the kinds of projects that are being proposed and get an understanding of how much funding is being requested from each applicant, so that we can determine how many applicants we can invite for a full proposal. And we'll get into more details on the proposal process in just a few minutes. Project duration, projects can last between 12 and 15 months. And so we realize that the length of the projects may vary depending on the scope of work and the requested funds and who is eligible to apply. To apply, you need to be a non-governmental organization, a community-based organization, a frontline community organization or group, or a tribe. And you need to be based in Washington, Idaho, or Oregon. I want to make a few points here. These funds are intended to support community-centered projects and organizations that may face challenges in accessing other grant opportunities. And so for local government agencies or others who are interested in applying, we really strongly encourage you to coordinate with the frontline community organization that you're interested in partnering with. So if you're a city or county or some other level of government, you're not eligible to apply unless you can clearly demonstrate a direct partnership with one or more frontline communities. The amount of money available for this grant program is $173,000. And so awards can vary in size from $5,000 to $50,000. And in the letter of interest application, you will be asked to select an estimated range of funding for your project. And when you're in that form and filling it out, just remember that those are just ranges. So please don't feel that this is necessarily locking you into a specific funding range if you're invited for a full proposal. Okay, so competition timeline and deadlines. So LOIs are due on February 28th, and they must be submitted by 6 p.m. on the 28th. In March, we'll review all the LOI submissions and determine which LOIs should move forward. And those that have been selected will receive an invitation to submit a full proposal by no later than March 31st. The number of applicants we invite to the next stage really depends on the number of submissions that we receive and the proposed funds that are requested. So again, the reason we have this LOI stage is because we don't want to waste anyone's time with pulling together a full proposal that we can't move forward with. Applications for full proposals will be due May 31st, and notification of awards will be sent out no later than July 31st. And we hope to get funds out the door to awardees no later than August, so the end of summer 2023. All right, so how to apply? So as I mentioned, it's a two-step process. The first step is submitting a letter of interest. You submit a letter of interest by going to our community grants webpage. You scroll down where it says application process. There you'll find a submit letter of interest button. And in this first step, all applicants need to answer these 5 questions that are on your screen there. So let's quickly go over those. So in the application, we'll ask you to describe your organization or group, its goals and mission, and the communities and groups that it serves. We'll ask what need or problem you seek to address with funds, and how your proposal will address that stated need or problem. And so this 4th question is optional. So as Jason mentioned, we have a lot of team members from many different organizations and institutions. And so if you think your project may align with a team member that we have in the NCRC, you can write in this question that you would like to partner with somebody from our team. This is completely optional, and it doesn't weigh against you if you don't have a team member from the NCRC. This is something that we just want to provide to potential applicants. And that 5th question is asking you the approximate dollar amount of your project. And so you'll have a choice of 3 different scales of funding. So if your project partners with a tribe, you'll be asked 2 additional questions. So that first question, you'll be asked to explain the partnership, what it looks like. And that second question, you'll be asked to explain how you will respect tribal sovereignty, including data sovereignty and the principles of free, prior, and informed consent. All right, so I want to go over this next stage. So if you are invited to submit a full application, this is what the application process will roughly look like. We want to keep the process low barrier and straightforward. And so applications will be no more than 4 pages. And so the level of detail and the length of the application will roughly depend on the amount of funding that is requested. So for example, an application for $5,000 will be much shorter and less work than an application for $50,000. So we're still figuring out exactly what the full proposal will look like, but I can share with you these 3 topic areas that will consist of the full proposal. And so that first one there, organizational background, we'd like additional details on your organization and its mission. And then we'll also have questions around the project description. So we'd like to know, what the stated problem or need is and how you plan to address it. And we also want to learn about the steps involved in completing the project. And in that final area there, project outcomes, we'd like to know what the desired outcomes of the project are. And we'd like to know how you define success for the project. And finally, we want to know how you'd like to share the outcomes of the project. I think that's a really important component of the grants program. We want to share out the successes of the awardees. And so we'd love to learn how you think it would be best to share out the outcomes of your project. All right. This is, I think, my last slide before we get to questions. So if you have any questions after today, you can reach us a few different ways. And you can chat with us about, your application or your proposal, your ideas, either by connecting through these open online office hours. So there's 2 dates there, and you can go to the community grants webpage. And under important dates, you'll see a sign up sheet for open office hours. You click that link and it'll take you to a Google form for signing up for office hours in 15-minute increments. The other way you can reach out to us is through email. The email address is there and it's also on the webpage. So you can shoot us an email and we will respond to that. And we will also post the response to the community grants webpage so that other people can see the responses. All right, so with that, I think we're moving on to questions. So you can pose a question to us in a couple different ways. You can pop it in the chat and Tess will collect that and we'll read it and try to answer it. Or if you'd like, you can raise your hand and Tess will call on you and you can unmute yourself and we can try to answer your questions. If we can't answer your questions now, we'll take them down and post them to our webpage.
Zach, you have a question in the chat from Marlena White. Can you provide more information on eligible costs?
Yeah, so I think that eligible costs include typical things like personnel or salary. I think that we can probably post a more detailed list of costs on the FAQ section, but is there something specific that you had a question about? I think that the costs are typically, salary, or they could be supplies, perhaps depending on the size of the proposal, equipment, but I need to double check that.
Oh, hi, I'll just chime in. Yeah, I was just mostly curious if there were any ineligible costs. I'm used to federal funding where there's usually a whole list of things we can't spend money on. So I just wanted to make sure there weren't special considerations for that.
I'll do some digging and post specifically if there's any ineligible costs on the webpage. But thanks for that question.
Thank you.
Awesome. We have a few more questions in the chat. Brad, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or I can read it out?
You're happy to do it. Thank you. It's a wonderful program to learn about. I hope this goes well for you. I really want to just appreciate the effort by our very sophisticated climate research group to make itself useful to communities. That's kudos. One of the questions that comes right to mind is, does the website list the collaborative team members and their published research and areas of focus?
Yeah, so the Resilience Collaborative has a webpage, and the collaborative is broken into 3 broad kind of research areas or portfolios. And so there's a scaling portfolio, there's a rural resilience portfolio, and then there's a coastal tribal resilience portfolio. And that's kind of how we've organized or categorized the work that we're currently working on right now. And so through those tabs, you can see all the different team members that comprise each of those portfolios. So that's a really great way to kind of familiarize yourself with the team members and their subject matter areas.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jason. Jason just popped the link to the webpage, the website, in the chat for everyone.
Awesome. We have a couple more questions from Marnie and Maggie that are sort of related. First one, can you provide more information on types of projects you are looking for? And the second was, does this need to be a new project, or can it fund staff time on an ongoing project?
So that first question is, Can
Yeah,
you
sorry.
provide some guidelines on what a project might look like?
Yeah, like the types of projects you're
Mhm.
looking for.
I would point you to our webpage. We have a kind of a list of topic areas, but again, I think the idea is that we don't want to be too prescriptive. If you have a project that you think would fit into the broad category of climate resilience for frontline communities, I would say it probably fits. I don't know, Jason, if you have any other information or details that you'd like to share on that.
Maybe the one thing I'll emphasize is that the program is really intended to benefit the communities themselves, right? These are often communities that haven't had access to these kinds of resources. So we're not looking to fund, for example, local government agencies that might be working with frontline communities. We'd rather fund the frontline communities who happen to be working with local governments, right? So that's one way of thinking about what we're trying to fund. The other is that it's sort of the need or the problem or issue that is being addressed. I think we really want that to be something that emerges from the communities themselves. So it's a little bit less of a research orientation, if you will, like let's study a community per se, and more of the community's stated desires, their attempts to improve their own resilience. So beyond that, it could be, I think, almost anything. You know, we would like people to be creative. I'd like to see some ideas that we couldn't even conceive of land in our laps, that are very creative. And I think we're willing to push the envelope on what you might consider, you know, research funding. Like this doesn't necessarily have to be just a research project. It could be much more about, you know, getting something implemented in a community, or, you know, funding, you know, tangible things that you can hold, not just ideas. So I know that's not necessarily any help beyond what Zach said, but just, you know, in an attempt to explain the intent here, that's what I would add.
And then that second question you had about whether it can fund existing projects. I think I need to do some digging there, but I would say that it should be a discrete project with a beginning and an end, with discrete outcomes. So I don't know if that provides any guidance for you.
Maggie, do you have any follow-up questions, since that was your question about the ongoing project?
I can include more specifics in a letter of interest, but essentially I work for a tribe and we're involved with an ongoing project that's trying to get off the ground, but our staff time is really limited in our ability to participate in this project. And so this would enable us to continue our involvement. But I can include more details in a letter of interest.
Maggie, I would just say that if what you're pitching is a compelling effort to really help a tribe move forward on an issue of importance, that you should absolutely apply. You know, I don't think we're going to have a hard no because you've somehow managed to gather a few $1,000s from some other source to start something. If we can really help to launch it or make a difference, then please do submit an LOI.
Thank you.
Awesome, great question. So we had a sort of clarifying comment from Zoe, who says that the notice says the funds cannot be used for staff time or salary support on page 3. And so maybe some clarity on that could be helpful down the line. Thank you for pointing that out. I'm not as familiar with it, but that's helpful to know.
So I think what that may refer to, I just popped in the LOI to see if I could find where that was mentioned. That's referring to if you're partnering with somebody from the NCRC, from the Resilience Collaborative, we want these funds to go to the community, not a team member from the NCRC. Or for example, if you are a city agency or some layer of government, we want the funds to go to the community partner, not the city partner in the project. So I think that might be what that statement is referring to. but staff time is definitely allowed, or personnel is definitely allowed. But again, it should be for the community partner rather than the city agency, for example.
Awesome. I think that was helpful. And just as an FYI, I'm trying to capture some notes and all the questions, and we'll post like a Q&A, the questions and answers to the website after this. And also, if we don't get to your question, we can try to sort that out after, but hopefully we'll get to everyone. So I see another question from A in the chat. Is there evaluation criteria around staff, board, etc., and their demographics? Any prioritizations around projects led by and for systemically underinvested communities?
I think the one comment I have is that the entire community grants program is intended to support frontline communities. So I think the major thrust of it is intended to support a lot of those communities that were just mentioned. I don't know if that's helpful.
Zach, just to elaborate a little, I think you're right to point out that the whole effort is aimed to assist frontline communities. We haven't developed the evaluation criteria for the LOI or the full proposal yet. We are limited as a state institution in some of the things that we are allowed to consider. And so we will have to be careful in the way that we go about this, but the spirit of the award is intended to serve underinvested communities, as you're suggesting. And so that's absolutely what we're looking for within the constraints of state law.
Great. A or anyone else, do you have any follow-up questions about that? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask at this point. Okay, let's. I see, Michelle, you have your hand up, so you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question now if you'd like.
Thanks, Tess. I work with North Olympic Land Trust based out of Port Angeles, and we've done a climate resiliency analysis that basically shows that a good portion of Clallam County is a very climate resilient landscape. And it seems like this grant program, brand new, very open-ended, and I'm wondering if it could help us cover costs like stewardship. We've conserved properties that are very climate resilient, but no grant will cover stewardship, which for those that aren't familiar with that, it's basically a one-time contribution that's made that will make sure we can uphold the promise of perpetuity we're making. It might be $25,000 or $30,000, but we put it in a restricted fund that we can only touch to take care of properties we have these obligations with. And if landowners can't help us with that, we have to fundraise it ourselves. As open-ended as this grant program seems, I'm wondering if we could submit an LOI to help us cover stewardship.
I think that's a great question. I don't have an answer for you. I don't know, Jason, if you do. I think that's something we have to dig into with the some of our financial managers and grants people.
I can't think of a reason offhand that would be problematic. But keep in mind that as we're judging the LOIs, that it's we're going to be looking at how it benefits the communities, right? So while I understand that there's a lot of landscape and environmental needs out there, tying it to the communities would be pretty important to be competitive.
Okay. And it's not a start and end, because we promised perpetuity. So these funds are used to make sure that there aren't uses on the property forever. And it does protect a climate resilient landscape forever, which benefits the community. We can clearly make that point.
But I do worry about that it's not like a start and end date because we are in this game forever.
Yeah, I think the start and end date is about how you spend the money and not about how long the project itself lasts. I imagine we'll end up funding a number of projects that are just the beginning of something bigger. And if we can, I would love to be able to raise more money and have future rounds of community grants that would allow people to do this work over a longer time frame. So I wouldn't take the time frame as like your project has to be over, but it would be nice at the end of the project to be able to speak to what was accomplished in that time frame. And hopefully it does continue and lead to more and better things further down the road.
Thank you.
Great question. Thanks for asking. Okay, I'm seeing a question from Zoe. They ask, some tribes are located on borders. For example, the Fort McDermott tribe is located on the Oregon-Nevada border. Is the rule on geographic location stringent in a situation like that? It's a good question.
I would say no. I think that it's flexible as long as there's some work happening within the 3 targeted states.
It's difficult to answer that question without the details, right? So if it was a tribe located on the border, but it's completely in Nevada, I think it would be hard for us to fund because there's a different CAP-RISA program that works in California and Nevada, right? So that border matters, but I understand that many tribes may cross over the border, right? And so if it's land in both Oregon and in Nevada, I think we're open.
Great, awesome. And all right. Also feel free if you have like clarifying things to put them in the chat or raise your hand. Ask a couple more questions that have been sitting here for a minute. Levon asks, if there's no project, will the funds be eligible to use for climate resilience initiatives in frontline communities?
Could you state the question again? I didn't follow it.
Yeah, if there's no project, will the funds be eligible to use for climate resilience initiatives in frontline communities? And this is from Levon.
Levon, I'd invite you to clarify the question, but I would say that if you're doing climate resilience initiatives in frontline communities, you should call that a project and submit an LOI.
Okay, so yeah, just clarifying, for example, if there's like an organization that, plant trees in frontline communities and you partner with them, is that considered a project? That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, I think it will.
Okay.
Right, there's like a thing you're doing, and that's your project. And if it's with frontline communities, you're right on target.
Okay. Thank you.
Perhaps a clarification that wasn't needed, but just quickly to state, that reminded me to state that there are community-based organizations out there in the world that aren't registered 501c3 nonprofits, and we're happy to work with those organizations as well. You don't have to be a federally recognized or state recognized nonprofit corporation. If you're a group of active citizens representing a frontline community, excellent. We definitely want to hear about your ideas.
Awesome. I see there are a couple hands up. Caitlin, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi there. I'm going to try not to get too in the weeds with my question. And I'm sorry, my dogs are about to play now. I guess if I'm just kind of going back to the eligibility question, I work at a university and a lot of our projects are research-based, but a lot of our work is direct and indirect with frontline communities, but also working with organizations who serve frontline communities. So I guess if you could just, if you need more clarification on my question, I'm just kind of trying to think if working in a university who we both serve directly and indirectly with our projects, frontline communities.
Yeah, I would say it depends on how the funds will be spent. That's a big part of it, and what the
Yeah.
project looks like, and how the extent to which you can demonstrate that it's a community-driven project and it has impacts for a frontline community, and that funds are not being used necessarily for university or another organization that is well-funded, for example. So I think that those are the kinds of things that we'll be looking at.
Another way of kind of thinking about this is I think part of what we're trying to accomplish is if this program gives money to a city government or to a university, it doesn't feel like we're empowering frontline communities. Part of the goal here is to empower the frontline communities, and that means giving them the money, right? Letting them choose how the money is spent. So the same project could be run through a city government or through the frontline community. But if we hand the money to the frontline community, then they have a lot more say so in how it gets spent and what they want to do with it. So it could be the exact same project, and it may be something that's been planned for a long time. But our intent is to empower those communities and not just sort of fund business as usual, if that makes sense. Maybe another quick follow-up on that. I keep thinking of my own question, so we should read y'all's, but we also recognize that in saying something like that some of these community-based organizations might not have a lot of experience writing grant proposals or reporting back on grants, and it is our intention to provide support for those kinds of activities. So if you're a member of a community-based organization and this is seeming kind of intimidating, like I don't know how I'm supposed to write this up, or how much time is it going to take to write up a report or something at the end, it is our intention to really assist you in that process to make sure that those sort of bureaucratic hurdles don't get in the way of good work being done in frontline communities.
Great. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to bounce back to a couple more questions in the chat because we have quite a few. This is awesome to see how many questions people have. One question from Joanna. Notifications of award are July 21st and project timelines need to be within 12 to 15 months. Is that from July 21st or is there flexibility with the start date?
There's flexibility. So the start date, I think, would start counting when the funds are dispersed. So that's definitely something that we can talk about.
Awesome. Great. Another from the chat, question from Dylan. How do partnerships with NCRC staff work? Are there any examples?
Jason, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I'll just provide a couple of examples of sort of efforts we've tried to pilot a little bit as we were developing the community grant program. So we have a couple of examples of NGOs based in Chelan County in Washington State that are working with Chelan County on their resilience strategy, their resilience implementation strategy. So one of those organizations is represents the Latino Latinx community in that area, and they wanted to get involved and they needed some staff time support to be involved, and that was something that we felt was important to support. So we didn't want to just support Chelan County and their process. We wanted to support the involvement of these voices that haven't always been included in those kinds of conversations. So there's one example of something that's kind of already ongoing, but I think there's others that are more creative and I guess more forward-looking, that they don't exist yet necessarily. And one of those is the idea of working between, and I should have said the partnership with that first one is that we have staff like Crystal Raymond is one of the technical leads of the rural portfolio of the Resilience Collaborative, who is working with Cheyenne County and those organizations to get that work done. And Zach has been spending a lot of time talking to them directly as well. So those are the kind of partnerships, like direct work with Zach and with Crystal. Just a separate example, another one of our colleagues, Rishi Sugla, who's the technical lead for the scaling portfolio. You can find all that information on the website I posted earlier. Has been looking into engaging in some oral history work, collecting information from communities that isn't the kind of stuff you get written down or you read in history books, right? But trying to make sure that knowledge is memorialized. And he's working with a nonprofit sort of community-facing organization that does that kind of work, and they're, I hope, gonna apply for some funds through here too, because they're doing some interesting stuff, and they've already started having some chats with Rishi about doing that kind of work. So it might be something that somebody's already started talking with a current staff member about, but it could just be a cool idea. If you go into that webpage and you see certain staff members and you recognize, hey, look, I'm a coastal tribe, or I represent a coastal tribe, and I see that Meade Crosby is the technical lead there. Write that down in that questionnaire for the LOI, and we'll try and connect you, if not with Meade, perhaps with somebody else in that portfolio who would be a good match for the interests. Maybe a final note is that is absolutely what that strange statement meant about you can't support staff time. The money we give out in these community grants partnerships are not meant to support any of our effort. So if we're working on a project with you, you're not paying for us. That's something that comes in addition to the money that you get to spend.
Thank you.
Awesome. Marlene, I see your hand up. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to touch back on a previous statement, because I had previously been thinking that the organizations applying for this grant would need a 501c3 status. And I'm in a rural community where I've been having trouble figuring out what organization would be the best place to house this kind of grant. We're all, already doing 5 different things, and scope creep's always an issue. And I have some potentials, but I guess with not having to have a 501c3 status might open up some possibilities. So I wanted to vet this concept with you guys. We have basically like a volunteer community climate change community coalition that meets voluntarily, has been for I think over a year now, not funded. Is that a kind of group that could get funded through this? And what would that look like?
That is an excellent question that I don't have an answer to, because I'm not aware of anybody having pulled this off before. So the financial and administrative staff that are assisting us in making this happen are fully committed to trying to push the envelope around how we can get money out there, how quickly we can get it to people. But we still work within restrictions as a state institution. So I don't think we could write a check to, say, an individual who happens to be running, the informal finances of a nascent organization like this. But I could see, working with you to figure out how to do that. So I could imagine, just as an example, a situation where we provide funding through a local community foundation. There's often community foundations that will fund community-based work. And maybe that would be money that would help you get your organization up and off the ground, right? Help you get that status that you need in order to apply for this money from other sources. But That's a long-winded way of saying I'm not sure we have a good answer yet on exactly how we'll do it, but I think we're going to be getting very creative to try and get money into the hands of the people who could use it the most and could make the most difference with it. That might look very different in different circumstances, though. And we might, I just want to be honest, like we might try really hard and not be able to figure out a way to do it, right? But we're gonna try in those circumstances where it's compelling and there's a frontline community need. We're going to push the envelope and work with our finance and administrative staff to find creative solutions to do the work.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'll also add that the letter of interest, it's a pretty short process. So I think that, if you are very even slightly interested in applying, then you should go for it and think really deeply about what kind of the goals or the impacts of the project might be. And so I think the LOI is, we wanted to keep it low barrier so that people, wouldn't invest a lot of time. But we also wanted to use it as a tool to understand like what is the whole like scope of possibilities for projects that we were able to fund. So I would say, yeah, fill out an LOI if you are interested, and think through really deeply and critically about like what are the kind of impacts that the project could make. And then I think the secondary question is, well, how do we fund that?
Yeah, so we maybe don't need our fiscal sponsor, so to speak, figured out at the time of the letter of interest. 'Cause we actually do have a community foundation. They're just going through a strategic planning process where they're kind of rethinking things. I've approached them about the grant and they were interested, but it's maybe not the best timing for them. But maybe by the time we'd be writing an actual application, they'd know.
The LOI is a very short process. Sorry, the LOI is a very short process. So I would encourage you to check out the application and think about it.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Tess, just looking at the amount of time we have and the number of questions, I wonder if you wouldn't mind me just like rolling through a few of these and providing quick answers, and then people can follow back up with, requests for more detailed information. Does that make sense? So I'm just looking at the chat here from Gwen Griffith. Our resilience training or capacity building for frontline communities within the scope of the project and funding going to both the community participants and the organization providing the training. Yes, I think that is fine. We can work with you through the LOI to define, anything that sends off an alarm bell, right? Like if it's city government is providing the training, we might want to, figure out a way to make that work differently, but that's the quick answer. Jill Kong, can this grant fund lobbying or advocacy activities or activities related to or with the end goals of being policy/systems change? That is, there's nuances to that answer. So I've got to probably start with, here's my first take, but we'll have to like dig a little deeper to answer this one. I'm guessing you cannot use this money to support or oppose a candidate for political office. That kind of lobbying is not what we're trying to do. But if you're talking about issue advocacy, right? So like 501c3s and 501c4s have this difference. But if you're talking about, pushing forward an issue that's important for your community, absolutely, that's important work to be done. And if it's about implementing stuff, policy and systems change might be a part of that. So again, letter of intent, not a huge lift. If it's raising red flags, we'll come back to you at that point. A lot of these are just thank yous. You're welcomes back. Let's see, Michelle Canale, I'm not sure, pardon my mispronunciation. There's time. I was wondering how organizations become part of the collaborative. Is it meant to include only umbrella type organizations and not small land trusts like ours? No, I think that that's a great question that's not directly related to this issue. Michelle, why don't you reach out through the email address we've provided, and we'll connect with you on that topic later. More thank yous. Will we share the slide deck for the meeting later, Tess? Okay, so it sounds like there's a yes. Probably looking at the community grants webpage is where you'll end up finding that. I think we're also recording this session, so people who aren't here today can listen in on all the question and answer Brad Warren, any prohibition on working with more than one community group? Absolutely not. Feel free to bring in the right number of people, the right organizations to get the work done. Another one from Brad. Could a group lacking incorporated organization work with a fiscal sponsor? Yeah, I think so. That's sort of what we were talking about just a moment ago, right? That we want the money to get to the people who can use it to do good work, and we're willing to be creative in how we do that. But we will face some constraints with how some of these resources are coming from NOAA, so they're going to have federal grant restrictions around them, and some of them are coming from other what's the word I'm trying to think of? Donated money. That's not the word I was looking for. I'm losing it, but charitable, like other charitable donations. And so if we end up in a situation where the federal restrictions might prevent a really good project from going forward, we might, dip into that other bucket of money that has different restrictions in order to make sure the work can be done. Joanna Stodden, are you limited to submitting one LOI or one project? No. Michelle, are you thinking of the word match, like matching financial resources?
I thought that's just the word you were struggling to get.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. Yeah, I came a little late, so now I'm all confused, but I appreciate you trying to help me out on the fly there. But I think I just ran through all the questions and we still have 5 minutes. So if there's any more, feel free to chime in or elaborating on the ones that I maybe didn't answer fully there. Zach, maybe throw it back to you to wrap things up and point people towards next steps.
Yeah. So we'll hang out for a few more minutes to see if anyone has questions. And again, if you do have questions after the webinar, you can reach out to us through the email that's on the webpage, and it's floating around in the chat window as well. You can also go to the webpage and sign up for office hours, and you'll find me on the other end of the Google chat, and we can use that time to talk about your project, to have one-on-one time to talk about your proposal, or ask, and I can try to answer any questions you might have about the process. And so again, that's on the webpage, on the community grants webpage, where you can sign up. All right, well, if there aren't any other questions, I think we'll wrap it up.